Hi guys, it's Chris and Maricos here with another video for you. Today we're talking about the alphabet. Now, some of you might think the alphabet, everybody knows that, but you might be surprised by some of the things that I'm going to tell you. So keep watching. You probably know that the alphabet is made up of 26 letters. Every letter has a special name. We use this name when we see the letter in writing. And when I want someone to tell me the names of the letters in a word, I ask them to spell the word for me. Spelling is very important in English because it helps us understand how to write the word. In other languages, people might not spell the word by the letters in the word. They might just sound out the word, which means that they say the sounds of the word and not the letters. But in English, we spell words. That means that you need to know the names of the letters. Now, I'm guessing if you understand what I'm saying to you right now, you have already learned the names of the letters. So I'm going to give you some other information about the alphabet. A lot of people don't know what sounds the letters actually make when they see the letters in a word, because letters very rarely are pronounced the same as their name when we see them in a word. So let's imagine that you see a new word that you've never seen before, and you're thinking, how do I pronounce this word? Well, that's what I'm going to explain to you today. So before we begin with the pronunciation of the letters, we should understand that there are two types of letters. There are consonants, like the letters B, D, F, G, and so on. And there are vowels, like A, E, I, O, U. Vowels usually have a very open sound, like ah or ooh. But consonants have a very closed or short sound, like d or t or k. Let's go through each letter in the alphabet and explain what sounds they usually make. So if you see a new word, you know how to pronounce it. So the first letter of the alphabet is A. That's right, the name of the letter is A. If we see this letter without any other letters, then we say A. If we see this letter in a sentence, it might be pronounced differently. So we need to remember that the sound of the letter and the name of the letter are different. The letter A has three different sounds that it might make in a usual word. The first sound is ah, like apple. The second sound the letter A makes is ah, like car. And the third sound that A very often makes is for example, America. In this word, there are two A's, and both A's sound like Repeat after me. America. America. The second letter of the alphabet is B, and in a usual word, it sounds like B. For example, bag. Sometimes the letter B is silent. That means we don't pronounce it. This usually happens when it's at the end of a word and it comes after another consonant. For example, the word climb. In this word, we write B at the end, but we don't pronounce it. The next letter is C, and usually the letter C makes the sound K. For example, cat. Sometimes the letter C also makes the sound S. For example, celebrate. The next letter in the alphabet is D. It usually makes the sound D. For example, dog. The next letter in the alphabet is E. And this one's tricky because usually it doesn't make the sound E in a word. It usually makes the sound eh. For example, in the word egg. Yes, sometimes it sounds like E, but usually that's when it's with another letter. For example, when we see two E's together, it usually sounds like E. We'll talk about that in a different video. The next letter is F, and it usually makes the sound F, like in the word friend. The next letter is G, and it usually makes the sound G, like girl. Sometimes it also makes the sound J. For example, gym. The next letter in the alphabet is H. Now, in English, this sound is a lot lighter, a lot softer than in most other languages. Some languages have many different sounds that are similar to the letter H, and they sound a lot harder. For example, in English, we don't want to say we want to say, it's really like you're just breathing some air out of your mouth very quickly. For example, in the word hello, sometimes the letter H is silent at the beginning of a word. For example, hour. And there are a lot of examples where the letter H combines with another letter to produce a new sound. For example, T plus H can make the sound th or the sound th. For example, think or this. The letter H combines with the letter S to make the sound sh, like shave. The letter H combines with the letter C to make the sound ch. For example, choose. We'll talk more about letter combinations in another video. The next letter is the letter I. And usually the letter I makes the sound eh. For example, in the word ill. And sometimes the letter I makes the sound I, like in the word island. The next letter we'll talk about is J. J usually makes the sound j, like in the word jump. After that is the letter K, which usually makes the sound k. For example, kill. After that is the letter L. L usually makes the sound L. For example, the word like. And this is another letter that people who speak different languages often confuse. In English, L does not sound like L. It only sounds like L. For example, if you're a fan of Star Wars, then you probably know the main character's name is Luke. That's right, his name is Luke, not Luke. The next letter in the alphabet is M, which usually makes the sound M. For example, meat. After that is the letter N, which makes the sound N. For example, now. And next is another vowel sound, the letter O. Now this one can be very confusing for people who speak English as a second language. Why? Because in English, we don't pronounce O like O. At least not in most countries where English is a first language. Instead, the usual sound that the letter O makes is O. This has two sounds in it. The first sound is and the second sound is oo. So let's repeat it together. Oo, O, O. For example, in the word go. And the letter O often makes another sound too. It's often pronounced as aw. It's like a mix between A and O. You say ah like A, but you make your mouth like a circle like the letter O. For example, hot. Now we need to remember that many sounds in English can be pronounced differently depending on where you're from. People who live in England pronounce it one way, people who live in America pronounce it another way. The word hot and the sound aw from the letter O is a prime example of this. In British English, it's usually pronounced aw, and they pronounce the word hot. But in American English, they usually say ah, and the word is hot. This can be confusing for people who are learning English as a second language, but you have to get used to different types of pronunciation. The next letter we'll talk about is the letter P. For example, in the word pick. After that is the letter Q. Q is another very interesting letter. Q makes the sound k, like in the word queen. But you're probably asking yourself, why does English need 3 letters that make the sound k? There was C, K, and Q. They all make the sound k. Well, usually after the letter Q, we see the letter U. In fact, in all English words, we see that Q is followed by U. Yes, in the dictionary, you might find words where Q is not followed by U. This means that this word was adapted from another language. And because U usually follows Q, we can say that Q makes the sound qu, which is a combination of the Q, k sound and the U, w sound, which is a combination of the letters Q and U. For example, in the word quick. Next, we have the letter R. This is another letter that's pronounced differently in different places. Most people in the world who speak English as a first language pronounce this letter as R. or r. And the sound of this letter is r. This is usually true at the beginning of a word. For example, right. However, there are some places where people speak English as a first language that pronounce this letter as r. So if your first language pronounces this letter like r, you're not completely wrong when you pronounce it like this in English. Some people do pronounce it like this. However, for most of the world, this letter is pronounced r. We also need to understand that in British English, when a word ends with the letter R, we don't usually pronounce the letter. For example, the word car. In American English, we pronounce the letter. We say car. At the end, we say car. But in British English, you don't pronounce this letter, or you pronounce it very, very softly. So instead of car, in British English, they would say car. Another confusing aspect of the letter R is that in British English and in some other dialects, for example, New England, people might add the R sound in words where there is no R, especially at the end of a word that ends with a very open vowel. For example, a name. If we take the name Masha, in American English, usually people will pronounce this name Masha with an sound at the end. But in British English and in some other dialects, people might add an R sound and might say Marsha, making the last sound of the word something like Our next letter is the letter S, which almost always makes the sound S. For example, smile. But we need to remember that at the end of a word, sometimes in the middle of the word too, this sounds different. It might sound like Z. For example, plays, like the boy plays with the children. Here we see that S does not sound like S. Instead, it sounds like Z. There are also situations when the letter S might sound like is. For example, kisses. 1 kiss and 2 kisses. Here we have 2 S's that sound like S and 1 S at the very end of the word that sounds like Z. The next letter is T, which usually sounds like T. For example, tomorrow. However, T has a very special pronunciation for some people. There are many people in the world who don't pronounce the letter T as T. Instead, they might pronounce the letter T as D. And in general, in pronunciation, the letters D and T are very closely related. We can see this in the middle of some words where we have the letter T, or maybe double T, and people in different places pronounce it differently. You probably know the word better. Well, if I'm speaking to American people, they might think that it sounds strange if I pronounce double T as T. Instead, most American people say better, which sounds more like a D sound. Better. This can be confusing for people who are learning English as a second language. Another thing about T in the middle of the word that can be confusing for a lot of people is that in some dialects of British English, people don't pronounce this sound at all. Instead, they do what is called a glottal stop. Now, that term isn't important to us in this video, but basically what that means is they stop breathing for a quick moment. And this gives the word a different sound. So if we said that the official pronunciation of this word is better, and the American pronunciation of this word is better, there are also some dialects of British English that will pronounce this word better. So you can see here that the T sound in the middle of the word has been completely removed. And instead, the speaker stops the flow of air for a quick moment and continues the pronunciation of the word. Our next letter is the letter U. Now, this is one of the most confusing letters, I think, for people who are learning English as a second language. Because usually when we see this letter, it's pronounced for example, umbrella or up. This is the same sound that the letter A sometimes makes. You might remember our example, America. This is the same sound. And sometimes the letter U also makes the sound U. This usually happens when the letter U is at the beginning of the word, but not always, so we need to be careful. A good example of this is the word useful. The next letter is the letter V, which makes the sound V, like in the word very. After that is the letter W. W makes the sound W. like in the word water. But you might think of this letter as also making a sound like ooh at the end of a word. For example, how. After that is the letter X. I think everybody knows that X makes the sound x, for example, in the word box. But what a lot of people don't know is that when X is at the beginning of the word in English, it usually sounds like z. For example, xylophone or xerox. In the word xerox, we see two X's. One at the beginning that's pronounced z, and one at the end that's pronounced x. Xerox. The next to last letter in the alphabet is the letter Y. The letter Y has two sounds that it usually makes. One of them is y. Y usually makes the sound at the beginning of a word. For example, yellow. But Y can also make a sound like E. This is usually when Y is at the end of a word, like day. And our last letter of the alphabet is... Wait, do you know the name of this letter? People in different countries actually have a different name for this letter. In England, this letter is called Z. But in America, this letter is called Z. That's right, you might not have known that. Z, or Z, makes the sound Z, like in the word zoo. Well, that's all of the letters in the alphabet, and I hope this video helped you understand how they should be pronounced. When you see a new word, you need to understand that not all letters are pronounced the same as their name. Of course, there are many other aspects of letters and letter combinations that can change how a word is pronounced. And English is not the easiest language for understanding how a word is pronounced by the way the word is written. Make sure you check out other videos about letter combinations so that you can understand how all words are pronounced. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to press like, press subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, it's Chris America.